G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome back to another video from the Path of Exile Awakening beta. In this video, I want to talk about the struggles and the state of leveling bow characters in the early game, specifically from the start of the game till the end of normal difficulty. Now, post normal difficulty, basically from the moment you step into Cruel through to endgame, bows feel great in the Awakening. They feel good on live, and I think they've only gotten better in the Awakening. Feels awesome. Basically, the moment you slap on that greater multiple projectiles, which are now available from a vendor for 1 ALC, and that chain, which is also available from that vendor from 1 ALC, you can basically alternate between lightning arrow, split arrow, tornado shot, ice shot. You can use a variety of different single targets. You can use puncture if you're using tornado shot. You can use barrage. You can even use frenzy if you can support the mana class. You have a great time with basically any of those sets of skills from about Cruel onwards. Now, this is kind of like the availability of skills, and just because I think like that's about where the builds start to come into their own. There might be some other things at play that I kind of need to explore a little bit more, but before that moment, before that stepping foot into Cruel, leveling a bow character is an absolute nightmare. It is so painful in the Awakening at the moment. I've prepared some background footage from my leveling experience here, and you can see the amount of damage I put out. Now, just be aware that in every clip in the background footage here, I am using the most appropriate gear available to me at the time, within reason. So basically, I'm using weapons that I was able to obtain that were level appropriate. So, you know, buying a bow from a vendor the moment I hit the new level. You know, I hit level 28, I go and buy the level 28 bow that just became available in the vendor, and then using the Rustic Sash vendor recipe to craft it up, or finding a weapon that was equivalent or slightly better. Now, that doesn't happen too often. You don't often find, especially when you're playing something like just a bow character, you have to only just find bows that are well rolled. So that doesn't happen too often, but you know, the rest of the gear is well set up. You know, you're using the appropriate links that are available to you at the point. So, you know, TLDR, I'm using appropriate level gear with the appropriate links and sockets that you have available to you for leveling a bow character in normal. And it is absolutely horrendous experience. It is so bad leveling a bow character through normal. I'm curious if you guys have leveled bow characters in the Awakening. Let me know in the comments below what your experience with it has been, because for me it has been an absolute nightmare. So I want to talk a bit about this, some of the changes that have happened in the Awakening, and I think the state of bows. Now, early game, so in that normal difficulty, bows struggle in a couple of areas. Single target is absolutely horrendous. Some of our options for single target are lacking. Getting your links supported for single target is difficult, and getting enough damage to deal, you know, to deal with trash mobs is fine. To deal with even champs is fine, but when you're talking rares and bosses, it becomes a bit of a struggle. You can tell whenever you have a character that doesn't have enough DPS, and you know, I'm an expert at low DPS characters, guys. When you have a character that doesn't have enough DPS, you can tell when you're clearing trash fine, but you can't clear rares and bosses within, you know, 10 seconds for a rare, or like 10 minutes for a boss, then you know you're in struggle mode, and that's what playing a bow character feels like in normal difficulty at the moment. So I think there are a couple of things that need to be looked at for early game bow leveling. Single targets for early game bows are really rough. Single target skills or something may need improvement. It might just be something that improves with an overall improvement of the damage availability for early game bows. One of the biggest changes I think that's had a big impact here is the Rustic Sash vendor recipe change. Well, we can categorize this as a nerf, I think. Essentially what happened was, on the live servers, if you trade a rare Rustic Sash with a Blacksmith Whetstone and a bow, you get a bow back with one magic modifier, the Wicked mod, which is 70 to 89% increased physical damage. Now, you could roll this a couple times or use a couple different bows until you got something that was in the 80-ish%. You know, you'd try and aim for something like 84+%. Now, that same recipe with a rare Rustic Sash instead gives you the Serrated mod, which is about 50 to 69%. I think they might have changed some of the numbers around, but you do get around that 60% modifier. So if we switch on over into game here, here's a bow I crafted, a Decimation bow. Now, this is past normal difficulty, obviously. This is level 53 bow. The examples I'll be showing here are not in normal difficulty, but the same thing applies. It's like the same set of circumstances can happen earlier in the game. This is just something that is, I think, a good highlight of what can occur. So this is a Decimation bow I crafted using the Rustic Sash recipe. I rolled it a couple times until I got something at least in the 60s instead of something like 50, which is, you know, what I got a few times. So this is kind of like the intended baseline for the leveling experience, or the amount of damage you will have when leveling an attack-based character. Now, there was a time before any of this existed, Before any of these leveling recipes, the rustic sash recipe, you know, the move speed boots recipe, the chain belt recipe, a lot of these things that were added, you know, the +1 gem recipe, all those things were added to kind of create a baseline leveling experience for the game, to give you something to fall back on if you didn't happen to get any good gear. Before that moment, we had to rely on trading, we had to rely on RNG crafting, we just had to farm a zone endlessly until we found a bow that was, you know, a weapon that was good enough for us to progress. I remember times, you know, farming in Fellshrine, trying to get that bow upgrade that I needed to be able to progress past that point, because your damage was so bad you could barely even kill things in Fellshrine. So this has changed. ZiggyD has implemented a lot of these crafting vendor recipes to give us a baseline leveling experience, and in the Awakening this has dropped down. Now, I don't think the intention of this set of changes, the change to the rustic sash recipe, I don't think the intention was to make like bows harder to level in normal. I don't think that was the intention. I think it was a change that occurred in line with some other changes, things like flat physical damage being more available on other pieces of gear, and maybe some other changes, the addition of higher tier mods or something. I'm not exactly sure the reasoning behind this change, but I don't think what has happened here with bow characters is the intention. And what has happened is that the baseline for leveling a bow character has dropped. Now on the live servers, a lot of you guys can probably confirm this, but leveling a bow character through the lower, you know, through the earlier parts of the game, even on the live servers, is pretty rough. It was possible with the rustic sash recipe in the state that it was, and you know, with master crafting, once you start to get into like later crawl, you can use the rustic sash recipe, combine it with master crafting, and get yourself something pretty passable. But this baseline has dropped down a bit, and the game has gotten a little bit harder as well in the Awakening on top of that. So the state of bows now for leveling through the early game is exceptionally painful. So here's an example of a set of circumstances that can occur that highlight, I think, the changing baselines of the crafting recipe. So I was leveling with this bow here, Grove Bow, in Cruel and Merciless, where I was having less problems because, as I said, bow leveling in Cruel and Merciless is fine. You have access to a better variety of support gems. Bow builds start to really flourish and come into their own at that point in the game. But the same set of circumstances can occur earlier in the game in normal difficulty, where it is a bit more of a struggle. So I was using this level 35 Grove Bow here that's really well rolled, and I was in the 50s. I was around level 50-ish, level 51 or something, and I was like, all right, I'm really starting to struggle with this bow now. It's a level 35 bow. It's, you know, it's it's becoming a bit rough using this now. So I sought out to craft myself a level appropriate bow. So I went and grabbed a decimation bow when I hit level 53, and crafted, you know, like a reasonable flat fizz mod using rustic sash recipe. Now, this wasn't enough. This was a straight downgrade from the Grove Bow. As you can tell, that although the damage numbers are a bit higher, the attacks per second is much lower on a decimation bow, and then it doesn't have that lightning damage on top of it, so it didn't quite work out. The crit chance wasn't enough to overtake the extra power of the Grove Bow. So, a little bit later, I found a decimation bow with a 16 to 33 flat fizz damage roll in the vendors, and I'm like, alright, well, let's see, is this what we have to do? I grabbed this decimation bow, I augmented it for the crit multi, and then I chucked a regal on it to make it a rare. I got the dexterity, unfortunately, and then I mastercrafted some fizz damage. So that cost me a regal, an augment, like an alteration or whatever to buy it, and then 6 alterations to craft the the IPD on it, the increased physical damage. There's also a higher mod you can do for something like 2 alks or something. I wanted to try and go with the reasonable price since I'd already spent a regal on it. So this is the bow I got. And you can kind of tell here that this is not a significant upgrade from the Grove Bow. If we look at this here, 661 DPS on the Decimation, 678 on the Grove Bow. The Grove Bow is actually higher DPS. Now, I'm using the Decimation because it's still a bit of an upgrade for me. It's higher crit chance, I'm one-shotting mobs a bit more, it's a bit more mana efficient. So overall, this is a better bow for me to use at this point, but it's not a significant upgrade. And this is something that is not only like, this is not even close to the baseline. If I switch out to this one, you can see it's a significant drop. So this is not even close to the baseline of that rustic sash recipe. So it could be that ZiggyD's intention is for the rustic sash recipe to not be the baseline for leveling. Not sure. I don't think that has been the case with melee. I think you can still level just fine using the rustic sash recipe as a melee character, with the occasional other upgrade that you find, and later in the game once you get to 50 plus where you can start mastercrafting. But earlier in the game, I don't think the intention and even the availability is not there to be able to mastercraft these rustic sash recipe weapons. And for a bow character, they're just not enough in normal difficulty to progress through with having a decent experience. So I am currently in the process of planning and preparing for a survival guide series, a second survival guide series. It's going to introduce new players to the game in the Awakening expansion pack, and in the process of that, I'm looking for a build to run through the game and to recommend to new players. Now, in the past, I was a bow character, and I thought bow characters are very mechanically supportive of teaching a new character, the new player, the ropes of the game. But based on my leveling experience through normal here, I'm not going to be going with that. I think I'm going to go with something a bit different, probably using melee weapons. As a result, because that normal leveling experience for new players is going to be absolutely horrendous. For an experienced player like myself, knowing exactly what I need to look for, knowing the support gems to look for, you know, using these vendor recipes that I know, and also equipping the most level appropriate gear constantly, and knowing how to play the game as well, it was still a horrendous experience. New players are going to have a really rough time leveling a bow character in normal difficulty. And of course you can say, well, just level Spectral Throw through normal, and that's basically what I would recommend. But most players want to level as their build. Most players want to, if they're going to play a Fireball build, level Fireball. If they're going to play some sort of fire spec, they want to level Fire. If they're going to play bows, they want to play a Bow Ranger. They don't want to first level with a melee skill. They want to level with their bows. Unfortunately, the state of the game for normal bow characters is that that is an absolutely horrendous, unpleasant experience. So I think there's a few things that need to be looked at. In short, I think single target needs to be looked at pretty heavily for early game bow characters, and I think the baseline for vendor recipe weapon availability needs to be looked at for bow characters as well. Maybe it could be a case of either adjusting the vendor recipe, maybe giving a separate vendor recipe for bows to the melee weapons, or maybe giving a bit of a tweak to the early progression, the early damage progression of bow skills could be what fixes this up. Either way, I think there does need to be some attention paid to normal difficulty leveling as a bow character, because it is an ultimately very unpleasant and off-putting experience at the moment. Anyway, guys, as I said, share your experiences in the comments below. I'm keen to hear them. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.